Going to do that right now with legal analyst Rachel Kugel. She's been following this all day as well. Rachel, good to see you. Thanks for being with us. You know, I was reading about
Thanks
this
for having me.
today. Rachel, and we're just going to boil it down to this, that this is what prosecutors will have to prove, that whether or not Jennifer Crumbley or anyone is responsible for other people's actions. Do I have that right?
Yeah, and it's totally unprecedented what they're doing here. You know, holding a parent responsible for the actions of the child is really has only ever been tested in very extreme circumstances. Like, for example, you give a child alcohol, and then a bad event happens at a party, or something where there's just obvious neglect and disregard of risks. But here it's not so obvious. And what the prosecution's done really is to try to bring this completely unprecedented case at which they're saying that these parents did not exercise due care. And if they had exercised due care, they then would have seen the extensive risk that they were dealing with and would have or should have acted differently. There's a lot of steps there. And remember, whenever anything happens that's bad, you can look back and see a whole variety of places
Sure.
along a timeline where things could have gone different, right? You talk about the butterfly wings and all of that, right? There's
Right.
always a myriad of things that could have happened along the way to turn that path. We're looking at it with 2020 hindsight. We now know the bad outcome, but Jennifer didn't, presumably. And so they're trying to make, by her testimony, make the jury understand that, this was the parent of a teenager. And there was all kinds of maybe strange things going on with that teenager, or moments of distress or anxiety or angst, right? And that's something that maybe those jurors, if any of them are parents, can relate to
I
some
see.
extent.
You know, Rachel, it seems like the prosecution will try to get this across to the jury that Jennifer Crumbley saw this coming, that there were so many signs. And you said it, we've said it here, the word unprecedented so many times when it comes to the trial of both Jennifer and James Crumbley, Ethan's parents, where, you have to essentially say, this is something that they knew would happen. That is so hard to prove. I mean, what is the burden there? And how difficult is this going to be because of its unprecedented nature?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the burden is proof beyond a reasonable doubt, right?
Sure.
As it would be in all criminal cases. But this type of case is even more difficult, right? Usually we criminalize, a mental state, and here, it's really bootstrapping toward a mental state that they're claiming she should have had, which I think that this type of involuntary manslaughter logic, you have to remember, is difficult and complicated even for attorneys to fully grasp what that actually means. This isn't a civil case where we're talking about negligence or monetary damages, right? This is a criminal case where somebody's literal freedom is on the line. And yeah, and it's so therefore the highest standard. I think this is a tough case to make, but I also think that they're at real risk because there's a really bad, tragic, horrible outcome where children died, right? And so
Yeah.
you've got kind of that hanging there as well. And remember also that there was really nothing underlying this that Jennifer or her husband did that was illegal. So, for example, this focus on giving having a gun in the house with the
Sure.
child, letting the child be with the gun, storing the gun. There were no laws in this state that require the gun to be locked up around a child, for example. Now, if they want to revisit that, fine, so be it. But there is nothing underlying this illegal that occurred. And so they have to sort of, bootstrap basically to try to get there.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and but you could argue as well in the aftermath of the shooting, evading law enforcement or questioning as well, going on the run for several days until they
Sure,
were brought.
I think there's a fugitive charge there, for sure, but that's a far cry from murder.
Yeah, let's talk about her performance on the stand today. If you were representing her, would you have advised that? Would you have said to Jennifer Crumbley, let's do this, this is a good idea? Do you think it did her any favors today with the jury?
I think to some extent she has to.
Okay.
Because I think that the jury has to see what was in her head, right? Because that's what this case is all about: what was in her head, and it's subjective, right? And so they really need to hear from her and determine if they believe that in terms of credibility. A lot has been made throughout this trial of how she's acted. Was she crying? What sitting in the courtroom, for example? I mean, I think she's held herself as best she could under the circumstances. I'm not for one against the crying. I think we talk a lot about when we watch these things and analyze them and watch sentencings, and we talk about somebody being stoic or showing no emotion. She was showing emotion as she
Right.
should, right? If she's not guilty and she couldn't have foreseen this, gosh, the death of children, the change in her family from those photos that they were showing her to today, I think there's reason to cry. And I think the jury needed to see that.
And she even said today that, she wished Ethan Crumbley would have shot her and her husband rather than these, four students there at Oxford High as well. Do you think her replies to the questioning were those consistent? Do you think her attorney is doing her a good service in her stewardship of her case, laying out the story, laying out the groundwork? What do you think of her attorney's performance?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're doing a good job of trying to, as best they can. This is a very hot case with so
Yeah.
much emotion and so much, tragedy, that she's just trying to sort of take her through her life and what she understood. Because remember, it is subjective, and she's trying to present her as a mother like any of us, dealing with, a troubled teen, not in a way that, I mean, remember, this kid had never been in trouble, had not done violent things that the mother was aware of. So she's just trying to paint that picture. And I think, at the end of the day, that's really what this case is about. And remember, she could be a bad parent, right? We could believe that they're not the best parents in the world, maybe even a bit derelict, but that's not the same as being criminally responsible for murder. And I think that that's an important point too, is her attorney sort of has to acknowledge to the jurors that there might be things about her you don't like. There might be things in her parenting that are not the way you would parent, but that doesn't necessarily make her responsible for this heinous and unforeseeable, act. I think is the pitch, right?
Wow, that's such an interesting kind of perspective on this all. It's not against the law to be a bad parent, and so that is why this is so going to be so difficult, I think, for the prosecution to make their case. It seems like we're dealing in innuendo, and a lot has been kind of cast about her as a person as well. The fact that she led this affair with this firefighter. And so do you think when that is all posed to a jury, they're taking that into account, whether the prosecution or the defense likes it or not?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things. Like, if you think about it, if you take apart any of our lives, if you had a prosecutor taking apart your life, they're even going as far as to say, well, there's more pictures of her horses on her Facebook page than there are of her children, and that should sort of mean something. Listen, I have plenty of Facebook friends that are posting their breakfast pictures of their lunch every day, and not their children. It's like, there but for the grace of God, right? If we're all judged on that social media and what's pulled apart,
Right.
I don't know, there could be innuendo about any of us. And remember, we're armchair quarterbacking here. We know the outcome, we know the end, but she didn't. And, so to go back and pick apart these little pieces of her life, I understand that that's the state's strategy. Whether she was having an affair, whether she posted pictures of her horses, whether her house was messy. I mean, these are things that they're really going toward her character. And
Okay.
I don't know that they're relevant at all
I
in
see.
terms of whether she committed this crime.
Rachel, I think we'll be talking, probably in the future about not only this trial, but the subsequent trial of James Crumbley. Do you make predictions when it comes to these things? Do you follow what your gut tells you? If you do, what does your gut tell you right now about her likelihood of getting a conviction or not, or which way the jury might go? Is it still too early to make predictions right now?
You never know what a jury is going to do.
Okay.
I've had cases where I thought I should win and I don't, and cases where you have no business winning, and you get a not guilty verdict that you didn't expect. I think regardless, there will be appeals, because this is new law with, making new law. One other interesting thing we saw today that is a little foreshadowing is we saw Jennifer, to some extent, blame her husband, and kind of throw him a little bit under the bus, in kind of alluding to the fact that he was the one responsible for the care and keeping of this gun. And so, in terms of foreshadowing, I think that was kind of an interesting little tidbit we got today. I think that we'll be hearing her attorney kind of close on that. And then I also think it's kind of interesting foreshadowing for that future trial that we expect to see in March, too, of the husband.
Yeah. All right. We'll have lots to look forward to in this story. I know it's captivated a lot of us. Rachel Kugel, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.